They warned me. They told me the HOA had the right to make me tear down my storm barrier, and 2 days later, I watched half the neighborhood drown. Karen, the woman who signed the order, was screaming for help in her driveway while floodwater clawed up her calves. That's how this story ends. But to understand how we got there, you need to know how it started. When I moved to Briarwood Estates, I wasn't looking for barbecues, newsletters, or neighbors who measured lawn height with a ruler. I'd already done 24 years in the Army, 2 deployments, 1 ugly divorce. I wasn't hunting for trouble, I was hunting for peace. The house I bought sat at the edge of the HOA boundary, right where the pavement faded to gravel and the river bent close enough that you could hear it at night. It was a fixer-upper, rotting boards, and a sagging roof, but it was mine. And I wasn't stupid. FEMA had marked the place as high-risk floodplain. 3 years earlier, a 100-year storm had ripped through and drowned half the neighborhood. So, before I fixed the siding or painted the shutters, I built a storm barrier. Reinforced steel panels anchored in concrete shaped in an arc to catch the flow. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't some sandbag eyesore. It was county-permitted, engineer-approved, the one thing standing between me and a river that didn't care about appearances. For a while, nobody said a word. Some neighbors slowed their cars, squinting like they couldn't decide if I was smart or just nuts. A few waved, most didn't. I didn't care. Then she showed up. Her name was actually Karen Delacourt. Vice president of the HOA, blonde Bob Pearl's lipstick that matched her blouse-white Lexus SUV. She marched up my driveway like she was inspecting a crime scene, clipboard in hand. She told me neighbors had concerns about my industrial-looking structure. I wiped sweat from my face and said, "It's not decoration. It's to keep the river from eating my house." She smiled, tight as barbed wire. Suggested maybe a stone wall or hedge would look nicer. I said, "Hedges don't stop floodwater." That was the first time she asked me to submit a retroactive request form. I showed her the county permit. She ignored it. That was the beginning. The letters came next, friendly reminders, then violation notices, then threats of $50 a day, backdated fines. I went to one board meeting. Just one. Read the permit aloud. Showed floodplain maps, photos of water halfway up houses 2 doors down. Karen thanked me for my passion and reminded me it wasn't the proper forum. That's when I knew this wasn't about safety. It was about control. So I did what I learned in the Army. I documented everything. Paperwork, conversations, photos. Even installed a camera trained on the barrier. Still, the air got heavy. Neighbors stopped nodding. I'd catch them whispering at the mailbox, eyes sharp, like I was breaking some unspoken code. And every HOA newsletter dripped with subtle jabs about maintaining harmony. One edition even printed a zoom lens photo of my barrier with the caption "Disruptive." No mention of the floodplain. Then came the summons. Architectural committee in person. I showed up early, binder in hand, permits, surveys, flood maps. Karen sat in the middle of the table like a judge. She didn't glance at a single paper, just repeated that word, harmony. When I reminded them this wasn't a lawn gnome, it was protection, one old board member asked if concrete and steel wasn't a bit excessive. I stared him down and said, "Not when you've seen what water can do." They handed me a compliance form demanding I remove the structure within 30 days or face legal action. I left that room shaking, not with fear, with fury, but also doubt. Sitting alone that night staring at the binder, I wondered if I'd lost perspective. Maybe I really was the stubborn vet who couldn't play nice. Maybe I should just rip it out, sell the place, start over somewhere drier. The thought made me sick. I poured a drink and told myself to let it go. But then I remembered Afghanistan. The villages washed out because someone cut corners on drainage. The soldiers we buried because higher-ups ignored warnings. I'd lived this before. No, I wasn't wrong. I was the only one seeing clearly. Still, Karen doubled down. She taped a final warning on my door, signed in neat cursive, with a date for removal by HOA authorization. The following Tuesday, she arrived in her Lexus with 2 landscaping guys carrying crowbars. I stood on my porch with the permit folder, told her this was trespassing. She smirked, ordered the men to proceed. I filmed everything, called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, bolts were scattered on the ground and one barrier plate had been pried loose. The deputies flipped through my papers, nodded slowly, and told her point blank, "This man's structure is legal. Touch it again and you could be arrested for destruction of property." The landscapers packed up fast. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she didn't back down. She never did. A week later, an emergency resolution landed in my mailbox declaring all storm barriers unauthorized regardless of prior approval. Fines of $200 a day. Threats of liens. It was surreal. Even with rain in the forecast, they cared more about aesthetics than safety. That's when I called an old friend, Alan Mendez, from the Corps of Engineers. He came out in a county poncho boots caked in mud, walked the perimeter, tapped the steel, and said, "If they tear this down now, half the street floods." He called in reinforcements, county inspectors, emergency management. They told Karen to, her face, stop harassing this homeowner or the Attorney General will get involved. She turned pale, then red but still spat out, "It violates community design." I almost laughed. I thought maybe that was the end. But people like Karen don't quit. 2 days later, during steady rainfall, she brought in a private contractor men in neon vests who claimed they were hired to remove an illegal wall. I showed them the court injunction Alan had secured, told them they were violating a judge's order. They shrugged. Karen arrived in a rental car umbrella over her face and told them to proceed. I wanted to swing. God help me, I wanted to, but one punch and I'd be the criminal. So I filmed shouting that they were committing felony demolition. Sparks flew, concrete cracked, and a section groaned out of alignment. By the time deputies shut it down, half my barrier was loaded on a truck. That night I worked until my hands bled stacking sandbags, bolting scraps of lumber plastic sheeting, anything. The rain hammered steady, merciless. I sat under a canopy with a flashlight and crowbar, watching the river swell. At dawn, the patched panel buckled. The river surged in. Not into my house, into theirs. From the hilltop I watched Briarwood drown. Driveways vanished. Mailboxes floated like toys. I saw a man waving a flashlight from his roof. And Karen in her bathrobe standing in her driveway clutching a dead phone while water licked at her knees. For a second I considered letting the river finish the lesson, but the army drills screamed in my head, "You don't leave people behind." I drove down in four-wheel water, pushing against the tires, pulled her onto her porch. She stammered, "I didn't know. I didn't think." I cut her off. You didn't want to think. Inside her house, the carpet was already floating. Upstairs, we sat listening to the neighborhood collapse. Cries for help, glass shattering, wood splitting under the current. She whispered once, "This is my fault." I didn't answer. Rescue boats came hours later. They pulled Karen out first. I stayed to help haul others, old folks, teenagers, even a woman in labor. By nightfall, the rain stopped. The flood had gutted the place. Briarwood's Showcase Street was a riverbed of mud and wreckage. The investigation came fast. My binder's videos permits they weren't just for me anymore. They became evidence. County officials, state oversight, even the Attorney General's office lined up to review. Their conclusion, the HOA had overstepped, endangered public safety, violated injunctions. Effective immediately, their authority was suspended, and Karen banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. She resigned in shame, her perfect image drowned in the mud she helped invite. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I just rebuilt my barrier, this time stronger, deeper, with the county's full blessing. The neighborhood, renamed their council, swore to focus on resilience instead of roses. Karen's house sat empty, and the river, as always, kept flowing. Because in the end, it wasn't me who proved them wrong, it was the storm, and storms don't lie. Lesson: when power ignores truth, nature will remind you whether you're ready or not.